Welcome back to the Beyond the Bestseller podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Schuknecht, and today's guest is Amanda Lee, or as she goes by in her as her pen name, A.E. Lee, author of One of the Lucky Ones, a memoir. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I want to start out by having you tell us about your book and why you wrote it. You told me a little bit before we started, so I'm curious to kind of hear about your story and why you decided to write this story.
My memoir, One of the Lucky Ones, is about how I was in an abusive marriage, kind of the beginning of it, how I got out of it, and the aftermath following it. And it really, it kind of came from a cathartic way to deal with trauma. On the night of August 3rd, 2019 at 8:59 p.m., my ex-husband now threatened to kill me and our children, to burn the house down, and went as far as got a gas can and a lighter. And
Oh
I
my
had to
gosh.
pull my 5 and 3-year-old at the time out of their beds and run. And like all parents will relate to, when you have a traumatic event, which unfortunately so much of us experience in one way or another, you focus on your children. So my focus was getting my kids okay. I made sure they had trauma therapists. I was researching everything. I got them 2 cats, which I instantly regretted when I had to clean the litter box the first time, but I was like, I need to do something for them.
Yeah.
And I kind of ignored myself until one day it was clear that I was having almost PTSD symptoms. And I talked to their therapist before one of their sessions, and she's like, you really need to get some help for yourself. And through therapy, through everything, I dove into it. I realized I needed a creative outlet. I had all this excess energy that I had been using for the fight or flight response being in an abusive marriage. And I tried, it was the height of COVID, so I was watching a lot of Disney Channel. So I tried knitting, and I can make a killer scarf, but that wasn't cutting it. And my friends and family were always like, you should write this down. You should write a book. And I'm like, have you people lost your mind? First of all, I hate writing, and I'm a single mom. Like, when am I going to have time? And then one night I was laying in bed and I started to think, oh, well, I could write a chapter about this. Oh, I would call it this. And then I woke up Saturday morning and it just kind of flowed out of me. And I
Wow.
thought, I wrote it and I was like, this is cute. Like, I'll just set it aside. I'll let the kids read it eventually when they're adults. They can hear my side of the story. And another night, after maybe one or two glasses of wine, I mentioned it to one of my girlfriends that I did it. And she was like, I have to read it. I have to read it. And she read it and she was like, this is really good. Like, you should get it professionally edited. I'm like, yeah. She's like, if nothing more, like, it'll make it sound better. I'm like, okay. So I found an editor, and the editor was pushing me to, like, you really should publish this. I'm like, really? She's like, but what if it helps one person? What if there's one person
Yeah.
out there that hears your story and is like, that resonates with me, or that I see myself in her and she's okay? And that really stuck with me, because when I was in the height of it, I just wanted to know I would be okay. I just wanted to hear other survivor stories of how they were okay after this awful thing happened to them. And I searched and searched and found a publisher, and I published my book. It'll be out about 3 years this October, and I've heard from other people that because of my book, they are now on the other side of an abusive relationship. And to me, it is completely worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to wonder. I mean, you had young kids, so they're still fairly young because that wasn't
Yeah.
that long ago, and you're probably co-parenting at this point.
Yes.
Um, so what? I actually started my career working in a domestic violence shelter. So
Oh, okay.
I think that's why probably your book stood out to me
Mm-hmm.
when I saw it. So you know, I know that in a lot of cases that it's actually more dangerous for women when they leave than to stay in the relationship because of that retaliation that happens. And so having written this book shortly after ending that relationship and then still being in a situation where you're co-parenting and still having to be connected with that person, I'm just kind of curious about how that has gone for you. Were you concerned about putting this book out there and having any kind of repercussions from the
Yeah.
relationship from that?
So, I'm to address the question kind of in parts. Absolutely right. The most dangerous time for a domestic violence survivor is right after you leave, which hadn't even occurred to me. Like I thought that night that was it. That was it was the worst moment of my life, but it opened my door, I'd be okay. And what followed was, a court system that in my opinion, didn't necessarily protect me because I hadn't called before. I didn't call the police before this night. So there was no record. So he got off with like a slap on the wrist. I got stalking, but because the police were a little less than helpful with the stalking, even though I had proof. All I had was a protective order, which is great, but at the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. It's not going to protect you.
Right.
It's not like if you showed up and I just wait. Like no, you can't. I've got a piece of paper. It's not. I was concerned about putting this book out, but as my publisher told me, if Ike Turner can't sue Tina Turner for defamation, you're okay. She's like, unless yours becomes an overnight sensation bestseller, they're offering you movie rights, we really probably don't have anything to worry about. Um, does he know about the book? I don't know. I would assume so. I mean, my kids know I write books. And little kids tell everybody everything. But it has not come to where we've had a conversation about it. And I don't know that we would, because it's a difficult conversation to have. And he has very narcissistic tendencies, and is a narcissist. So I think he probably thinks my memoir is a great work of fiction.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so tell me about like your story, you mentioned like how it's helping other women with getting on the other side of it. If you were to talk to your former self, what did you say it was 2019, right? August
Yeah.
2019. So in 2018 or early in the year 2019, what would you tell yourself now if you could go back and speak to that version of yourself that was in the thick of it?
I would tell her that you're gonna be okay. Everything is gonna be okay, and you're gonna be better. When I was in the thick of it, I often get the question like, why did you stay? Or didn't you recognize the abuse? And no, it's not like we had this beautiful, happy marriage and then all of a sudden abuse happened the next day and then it was every day. That's not how abuse works. It's a slow trickle, like destroying your self-esteem. And then all of a sudden you kind of wake up and you're like, oh my God, this is actually happening to me. And I would tell myself like, it's going to be okay. And I always when anyone asks me if I have a piece of advice or what I would tell my younger self, I always go back to no one ever regrets leaving their abuser. No one ever regrets leaving, regardless of how hard it is or what happens after. If you truly are like the light at the end of the tunnel, no one ever regrets leaving that relationship. You're not ever like, God, I wish I would have stayed a year longer.
Yeah. What are some of you mentioned that people would ask like why wouldn't you leave or and I was thinking of that question more in like terms of like what were the signs to you, like how did that start? You said it was subtle, like so how did you start to recognize what was happening and how you were reacting? And you had this big kind of traumatic moment that was the moment of like, now I need to leave, right? But like there had to have been a lot of smaller
Oh yeah.
incidences along the way. Like what are those things that people should be like, again, like you said, it's almost like so subtle that you don't realize it's happening until you know, not till it's too late, but like it's like then you're like, what is going on? Like what is
Right.
happening in my life, right? Like,
Yeah.
so what are some of those things that would be like, I don't know, red flags, like things to be thinking about, like if, because sometimes there's like gaslighting going on too, where you're like, is this me? Am I crazy? Like what,
Yeah.
is it my
And
fault, right?
yeah, and that was 100% what was happening. And it wasn't until it was like the height of the Me Too movement had started, and then the term gaslighting was everywhere, and half the people were using it wrong. But I remember I was driving to work and I was listening to the radio and they were explaining gaslighting, and I had to pull over because I was crying because I was like, "Oh my God.
Mm,
This is what's happened." That was my wake up moment. I think when it comes to red flags, like every relationship's different, every person's different, especially if they're dealing with trauma and abuse. But my go to is always, if you don't want to tell the people you're closest to, something's wrong. Like
mm,
if something's going on in your relationship and you're scared to share that information with someone that you are incredibly close, for me it was my mom and my sister and my best friends, then something's wrong. That is a huge red flag.
yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Were were you experiencing physical abuse
Hmm.
in addition to the emotional? So I mean that's a little more obvious to point out, right? Like
Right.
I have a bruise. I
Yeah.
like like but like it sounds like there was also a lot of emotional abuse going on. Can you talk about that a little bit and like some of the things that you experienced, like gaslighting? You mentioned that people use it wrong. I actually had a moment a year or so ago where I realized I was experiencing gaslighting in the workplace, very different than in a
Oh, yeah.
relationship.
Hmm.
But it was like the realization of what was going on made me really understand gaslighting in a way that like before it was like a word that I didn't get. I didn't understand
Hmm.
it, right? But then once I understood what was happening, I was like, oh my, and now it's so obvious to me when it's going
Right?
on.
Yeah.
So anyway, can you explain that a little bit and how that's used in emotionally abusive relationships?
Yeah, so I did experience physical abuse. It wasn't constant. It was here and there. Not that I'm excusing it, but it was definitely more psychological, and it's like a slow chipping of your self-esteem. And it started with like he would tell me, "No, I told you this. No, remember I told you this." To the point where I was like, "Oh my gosh, I think there might be some, maybe I need to go see like a brain doctor because there's some I can't remember anything." It's slowly like nitpicking my driving to the point where I'm like, I'm a really bad driver. I don't want to drive at all. It's, you know, almost tricking me into thinking like that I am financially irresponsible because I never had any disposable income, when reality, I was the one who was supporting our family and he was just like hoarding away money.
Mm,
It's like a psychological game. And it's the chipping away of, well, no one's ever going to want you. They're going to want me. No one's ever going to want to date you. And it's like, yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. And it's the chipping away of your self-esteem on it's like a slow burn. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's to the point where, like, I remember looking at myself in the mirror one time and being like, I don't even recognize myself. I'm
mm,
like a shell of the person I used to be. And in terms of gaslighting, it's everything your fault. I use this example when I'm trying to explain gaslighting. It's as if your partner is cheating on you and you catch your partner, and then they turn it around on you and say that they cheated because you weren't giving them what they wanted. So they had to go find someone else. So really, it's your fault that they cheated on you. Like
mm.
that is the epitome of gaslighting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and in some cases, the relationship might be emotionally abusive, not physically abusive, and it's harder to recognize that emotional abuse
Yes.
because it is so subtle, and it is like that, like where you feel like, oh, it's me, like something's wrong with me, right? Like, or your self-esteem is so chipped away that you are like, you don't have any confidence in yourself, in your driving ability
Yeah.
or decision making ability. Yeah, so it's harder. I had a woman on earlier on in my podcast, Amanda Cassar, who talked about financial abuse in relationships. And if anyone is thinking that that might be something that they are experiencing, that is a good episode to go back and listen to. Just want to mention that here because she talked about how prevalent financial abuse is. And so she works with, I don't remember, she does some education around the financial abuse and learning the signs of that and helping people figure out how to get out of that situation. So when you were writing this book, it was after you were out of the relationship. Did you find that process somewhat cathartic, like working
Oh,
through
yeah.
some of the things that you had experienced?
Absolutely. Like it was, I felt like I would write a chapter and I would just be able to like, it's like a weight lifted off my shoulder. Like I was able to let it go. Like it was some of the best therapy that I did was writing this
Mm.
book.
I'm curious if you had anyone in your personal life who read it and questioned you around any of the things that you wrote, since you weren't telling people what was going on
Yeah.
at the time. Were they surprised, even doubtful about some of the things that you wrote about?
Well, no one in my life doubted what I wrote about. It was more shocked that to the degree of it. I heard, from my father and my mom and my brother-in-law, and they were like, if I would have known that this was happening, I would have been down there immediately. My older brother was like, I could only get through half the book. I'm so enraged that this was happening to you.
Hmm.
So it was a lot of, I didn't realize it was this bad.
Yeah.
When I had to grab my kids and run, and we ran to our neighbor's house who was a police officer and calling 911, I knew at that moment I could not go back. Like this was it. So then I had to tell everybody what was happening. So there was no doubt of what I had experienced and that this was not the first time. But to the degree of it, they were like, I had no idea. I did experience, which it didn't even occur to me that anyone wouldn't believe me because I'm like, who in their right mind would make anything like this up?
Yeah.
But I did have one of my neighbors who was close to my ex-husband, when she had heard what happened, couldn't believe that I was going to split up my family.
Mm.
And I don't know exactly what their thoughts were, but it must have been enough to think that I was making it up because they then gave my ex-husband access to a camera in their house that was pointed at my driveway, which is how he stalked me for a year and a half. My coming and going, what the kids were doing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So, but it never occurred to me that people wouldn't believe me. Like, I remember going in to get a protective order. I got an emergency one that night, and then I had to go in like that Monday. And the advocate that was helping me fill out the paperwork, they were like, okay, well, act scared. When you go into the judge, make sure you act scared. I'm like, I am scared. What are you talking about acting? Well, you got to make sure you're scared or they're not going to believe you. I'm like, why would I make this up?
Right, right. Yeah, it's sad, but that's the reality is that
Hmm.
it is so, I don't know, hush hush that when you do start speaking out, people are, they don't believe it. Like,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes it's like, no, nobody would ever do that to somebody else. Like nobody would ever, because,
Hmm.
they wouldn't maybe, but
Yeah.
it happens, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you hate writing.
I do.
Yet you wrote this book, and we had a conversation before we started recording about the other books that you've written. So, how many books have you written and
I have
published?
written 5 books and published.
Okay. Okay. So, how did your I hate writing turn into I have published 5 books?
So, I mean, when I think about writing before I became an author, I think of the days of like writing papers in college and, school. And I always wanted to be that person who got like the beautiful journal from Barnes and Noble and like, be very Jane Austen and like sit under a tree and talk about my thoughts. And that was never me. I tried. I have a stack of beautiful journals that my daughter now has. And I just always like, it's like a love-hate relationship. And now as an author, like when I'm like in the zone and writing, I love it, but it almost becomes obsessive. It's all I can think about. Like if I'm in the middle of a book, it's like, oh, I should do that. Oh, I should do that. I'm writing notes on like sticky notes. I'm writing notes on my phone. Like it's a constant like moment, but like I don't know, it's a love-hate relationship. It's hard to describe. There's a quote, and I forget who said it, but it's like I love writing. It's awful. But it's so it's so true. Like when I'm writing, I love it. And when I'm not writing, I'm thinking about writing, and it's almost like, oh God, okay, well, I've got to do the outline. I've got to write the book and I've got to write the chapter. But once I sit down and write and it just flows out of me, I'm like, oh, I love this.
Nice, nice. Well, it's great that you've found that creative outlet. Were those other books, the other books that you've written are all fiction, right?
Yes.
Yeah. When, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Was this, the memoir was the first, and then that kind of sparked the writing of the others?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so my memoir was my first, and then my second was a children's book. So what I found while I was in the thick of it was I was looking for any type of resource that I was out there for my kids. I didn't want anything super specific, but something that dealt with trauma, kind of like reassuring them. And I couldn't find exactly what I wanted, so I wrote it. And it's just about a little boy waking up in the middle of the night and the mom walking him back and just reassuring him. And then I wrote a fiction series that follows a female domestic violence detective and kind of the cases that she works on.
Okay. So related also to your memoir, your experiences, but fictionalizing the stories. And yeah, I love that. So I am going to. Oh, I did have one more question for you. I was like, I know there was something else I wanted to ask you. You mentioned I looked around and I found a publisher. So I want to hear about that as well before I wrap us up. How did you find a publisher? What was your experience with that?
It was awful.
Sorry.
Really? So I was like, I'm gonna do the traditional route. I'm gonna go look for literary agents, and I sent like I forget what it's called now, but I sent everything I needed to like 300 literary agents and got ghosted by most of them. Maybe heard back
Okay.
from 10 and it was like, thanks, but no thanks. And then Fulton Books had been reaching out to me and I thought it was a spam call, so I wasn't picking it up. And then one day by accident when I was in the car, I hit connect instead of ignore. And one of the people at Fulton Books, one of the publishers, got me on the phone and said that they wanted to publish my manuscript.
Wow. Wow.
But
And
it
so
was
you
it was a
that
long process.
yeah. So that is one that you had reached out to? Like you had pitched your book to them?
I did, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they got back to you and okay.
But it took a while.
Um,
Like I want to say I started pitching my book like June of 2021 and it was like December of 2021 that they
okay.
reached out to me.
Okay, that's actually not too bad.
Yeah.
So it took about 6 months or so to find a publisher, 300 or so publishers
It
that
was
you
something
reached out
crazy like
to.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask about that because we don't talk about that often in here, but I do have people ask me often about, should I go the traditional route? Should I self-publish? And I tell people, if publishing traditionally is important to you, pursue it, right? Like you pursued it. I've had traditionally published authors on my podcast who had an easier time finding a traditional publisher, but also like just kind of got lucky and didn't really know that it can be hard.
Yeah.
And then, your experience is like, I just kept doing it. Like I didn't get discouraged. I just kept trying. And ultimately, if you hadn't heard from Fulton Books, you could have said, okay, I'm going to publish it myself, and there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that as well. But
Yeah, and in fact, my latest book I did end up self-publishing.
okay, okay, yeah. And I think there's no, that's the main thing I tell people is like, there's no one way to do it. It's, it's really just up to you, like what what is really important to you. Is it important to get the book out soon? Is it important to, have it for a certain event or something? Or is it
Yeah.
really important to have that backing of a traditional publisher? But really, there's no one way to do it. So
Yeah.
well, thank you for sharing that. Well, so I will link to one of the lucky ones in the show notes. Anything else that you want to share with people as far as where they can find you online, connect with you, learn more about you and your books?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on my website, which is authораelee.com. And also on Instagram, I'm at authораelee.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And thank you for being vulnerable and brave and writing that story to share it with the world, because I think you are helping other women learn from your experience and hopefully get out of their bad situations. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Looking for a community of women writers to support and inspire you on your journey? Join the Author Power Circle. Connect weekly with fellow authors, stay accountable, and move your book forward in an encouraging community. Learn more at kellyschuknecht.com.